Hi, my name is Frank Martinelli, and I'll be your presenter today. I'm with the Center for Public Skills Training based in Milwaukee. My aim in this video is to encourage nonprofits like yours to increase their involvement in advocacy aimed at transformative systems change if they're not already there. I'd like to thank you for taking time to view this video. There are other videos in the training series, and I'll tell you more about them at the end of today's program. Now back to the title of today's program, Getting to Root Causes, Systems Thinking, Advocacy, and Transformational Change. This renewed focus on advocacy and systems change comes at the right time. This is the moment in Milwaukee to be talking about advocacy and deep systems change. The continuing impact of the pandemic, the severe economic hardship experienced by so many Milwaukeeans, and the renewed and long overdue calls for racial and economic justice make advocacy important like never before. Let's remember that even before the pandemic, Milwaukee was one of the poorest and most racially segregated cities in America, and this hasn't changed. There's now greater awareness of the need to finally get to the deep root causes of the many problems facing people in our community, and advocacy is one of the powerful ways to tackle these root causes. Here's our agenda. We're going to start with a brief overview of advocacy. This is a good starting point for us because addressing poverty and other community problems at the root cause level can only really be accomplished through advocacy and public policy work. Then we'll define what we mean by root causes. This is important because the term root cause is used to describe so many things today that we can lose our way before we even try to uncover root causes. Then we'll talk about the difference between root causes of poverty and the symptoms of poverty. From there, we'll go on to talk about an important change model that describes the difference between transactional change and transformational change. Then we'll talk about root cause analysis as the key to transformational change. Finally, we'll also describe the critical link between root cause analysis and what we refer to as systems-informed advocacy. The title of this video includes the words, Getting to Root Causes of Poverty. Before we go any further, let's center ourselves on a basic definition. We define poverty as a state or condition in which a person, family, or community lacks the financial resources and essentials for a minimum standard of living. Often poverty means that even if a person is working, their income level from work is so low that basic human needs still can't be met. Basic needs like housing, heat, food, water, healthcare, quality education, and more. We have to ask ourselves the question, why does there continue to be widespread and persistent poverty in our community? It's not that we haven't tried to address this issue. Despite the heroic efforts of caring people and organizations spanning generations, life has not improved for many Milwaukeeans. Our city continues to set records of the wrong kind. Often when a new study is released, Milwaukee is at or close to the bottom of the pack on key social and economic indicators. Why aren't we making more progress after all this hard work? Well, for one thing, like other US cities, we have a local economy built on the assumption that thousands of Milwaukeeans, many who work full-time, can be paid substandard wages that trap them and their children in permanent poverty. We try to alleviate this through programs that reduce the hardship for individuals, but widespread poverty persists. That's because we've failed as a community and nation to tackle underlying root causes, those economic, social, and political systems that produce high levels of poverty. As we said at the very beginning of this program, there's now greater awareness of the need to finally get to the deep root causes of the many problems facing people in our community. And advocacy is one of the powerful ways to tackle these root causes. So let's start by defining advocacy. Advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. There are three basic forms of advocacy. First, broad advocacy, educating policymakers, the media, and the public about critical issues. Next, legislative advocacy or lobbying, working for or against a piece of legislation. And third, election-related activities like voter registration, education, and getting people to the polls. The important point here, the law allows all nonprofits to engage in all of these activities. Let's take a closer look at each. Starting with broad advocacy, all types of nonprofits are allowed to educate decision makers, policymakers, the media, and the public about issues that are important to their mission, as long as this work is nonpartisan, meaning the organization can't express support for or opposition to specific candidates or political parties. And then legislative advocacy or lobbying. This can include drafting legislation and working for or against a specific piece of legislation. All nonprofits are allowed to engage in lobbying. Even tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofits are allowed to engage in a limited amount of lobbying. Now, there are some limitations on how much legislative lobbying is permitted, and there are some record-keeping requirements. Again, the important point is that this activity is definitely allowable within the defined limits. And then election-related activities. Nonprofits can engage in voter registration, education, for example, organizing candidate forums, and turnout activities, as long as this work is nonpartisan. Again, not supporting or opposing specific candidates, sets of candidates, or a political party. So it's clear that nonprofits can engage in advocacy. Why should they? There are some compelling reasons. Let's take a look at them now. First, advocacy is a powerful way to advance our missions. Next, decision makers and policymakers need nonprofits' knowledge and expertise, and advocacy is a way to share that expertise with them. Another reason, government decisions affect the funding and regulation of nonprofits, and we know that years of progress can be completely wiped out with the enactment of one bad law or regulation. Advocacy is also a way to build relationships and power with influential decision makers and policymakers whose actions affect us. And finally, advocacy is important because we know direct services to individuals alone, while important, do not change unjust underlying systems that create the need for direct services in the first place. More on this in a moment. In this video, we're going to be talking about a particular approach to advocacy. I call it systems-informed advocacy because it grows out of an understanding of the deep root causes of community problems like poverty at the underlying systems level. This graphic illustrates how we get to advocacy that is systems-informed. We're going to use this graphic to describe the approach, and we're going to build on this model in the rest of the video. Let's start over on the left. We begin with systems thinking. We're defining systems thinking as a set of skills used to develop a deep understanding of an underlying socioeconomic structure like poverty. In this first stage of the process, we use systems thinking tools to analyze the problem of poverty in order to discover what the root causes of poverty are. We define root causes as the underlying factors and forces that create poverty and make poverty likely to persist, even though services may be in place to help individuals and families meet their immediate needs. Taking action to achieve transformational change at the deeper systems level is impossible without knowledge of the deep root causes of poverty. Moving to the right, in the second stage of the process, we begin to reflect together on what we're learning and deepen our shared understanding of the root causes of poverty. Continuing to move to the right, in the third stage of the process, we use our growing understanding of root causes to develop action strategies that address the root causes through advocacy that is now systems informed. That is, using our growing knowledge about the system of poverty and its deep root causes. In the fourth stage on the right, we see the results of systems-informed action over time, the transformation of systems that cause and maintain poverty. Now let's talk about some of the key ideas that are the foundation of this approach to advocacy. Taken together, these ideas describe new ways to think about advocacy as a powerful force to change the underlying social and economic systems that create and maintain poverty. While advocating for individuals in need is important and must continue, right now, we're not talking about advocacy on behalf of a single individual. We're talking about advocacy that leads to deeper systems change. The focus of systems-informed advocacy is changing the underlying systems that produce widespread and persistent poverty and create the need for services to individuals who are hurt by these systems. The first key idea, viewing advocacy as a mission impact multiplier. Simply put, direct services alone will never end poverty or even reduce it in significant and lasting ways. As we've said, while direct services to individuals are important and must continue, the underlying systems that create the need for many direct services continue to go unchallenged and unchanged. The underlying systems referenced here again are the social, economic, political, educational, and criminal justice systems. This is important because many nonprofits don't engage in advocacy even though they can. Now just imagine if a critical mass of nonprofits join their direct services to systems-informed advocacy together. Imagine what could begin to happen in our communities. The second key idea, advocacy that is informed and inspired by the authentic voices of the community. This is important because sometimes advocacy efforts can be top-down instead of being guided and led by the community itself. This involvement can also lead to engagement of community residents in direct action advocacy roles themselves, empowering them to act on their own behalf and building their capacity to play similar leadership roles in the future. Another key idea related to the last one, advocacy that builds community power. Building the people power that enables a community to act together on its own behalf becomes a key outcome of advocacy. Building community power becomes just as important as achieving policy wins, as important as policy wins are. One organization involved in systems-informed advocacy described this shift as a pivot to power. People power went from being an important driver of policy and systems change to being the change that the organization sought to achieve. This is critical for organizations and funders that support advocacy and systems change efforts to advance equity, justice, and real empowerment of historically oppressed communities. These ideas lead us back to the core message of this video, the focus on systems change through actions that address the deep root causes of poverty. It's very helpful to think about systems-informed advocacy in terms of the difference between transactional change and transformational change. This model comes to us from the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. First, transactional change. Transactional change largely works within an existing set of institutional and structural arrangements that don't operate to the benefit of everyone. Transactional change focuses on the individual who experiences a problem or negative condition associated with poverty. In the transactional change mode, the key question we might ask ourselves is, why is this individual person or family poor? If that's the question, our response is likely to offer that person or that family programs, services, and supports to reduce the impact of a problem or negative condition they experience because of poverty. Now, transformational change. Transformational changes are more fundamental changes in the very structures and systems that shape negative group outcomes like poverty. Transformational changes are more durable and lasting over time. They have greater effect as the causes of problems are alleviated, not just the effects or the symptoms. Transformational changes focus on the systems and structures that create conditions that negatively affect individuals and families. In the transformational change mode, we ask a different question. Not why is this individual poor, but rather, why is there widespread and persistent poverty in Milwaukee? What is it about the way Milwaukee is structured and functions that results in persistent and widespread poverty, experienced in particular by people of color? We ask ourselves, who benefits from the current systems? Who's hurt by the current systems? And what changes in the systems are needed? As a result of efforts to uncover root causes, we'll learn more about existing systems, structures, laws, regulations, and policies that hurt the people we serve. Based on this shared new knowledge, we can then take action through advocacy to change or eliminate those same systems, structures, laws, regulations, and policies. Now, if our work is on achieving transformational changes, there are a few things we need to be clear about. First, we need to be clear about what systems we're actually talking about. The term systems change is used a lot today and can refer to many different kinds of systems. What systems are going to be the focus of our advocacy and public policy efforts? Second, transformational change requires that we understand the deep root causes of poverty. And third, we need to be clear about the difference between the root causes of poverty and the effects or symptoms of living in poverty. Let's take a closer look at these 3 points. We're talking now about transformational systems change, and so it's important to be clear about what systems we're talking about. Often, when people talk about systems change and social change, they're really talking about the systems that deliver direct services to individuals in need, making changes so that needed services get to people more efficiently and effectively. And of course, this is absolutely essential, and this work must continue. But improving service delivery systems is not the same as changing the underlying systems in our community that create the need for direct services in the first place. Again, the systems we're referring to are the economic, educational, criminal justice, healthcare, and political systems that frequently operate in unjust ways. The focus of systems-informed advocacy and public policy work will be on transformational change at this underlying systems level. Think of it as the difference between managing a problem or creating a temporary workaround and actually solving the problem once and for all. The second point, transformational change requires that we understand what the root causes of poverty are. As a first step, let's review our definition of what we mean by root causes. We introduced this definition of root causes earlier. It comes to us from the Building Movement Project, an organization that works nationally and locally to build capacity of groups to engage in systems change. Root causes are underlying factors and forces that create community problems and make those problems likely to persist, even though services may be in place to help individuals and families meet their immediate needs. So the important point here is that despite our best efforts, widespread poverty remains and even grows, often because we're focusing on the symptoms of poverty and not the root causes. There are many reasons why it's important to uncover the deep root causes of poverty. First, understanding the root causes of poverty is really the key to achieving transformational changes, as we discussed earlier. Let's remember, taking action to achieve transformational change at the deeper systems level is impossible without knowledge of the deep root causes. Second, root cause analysis leads to powerful learning about the complex factors that explain why so many people in our community are poor and why they remain poor in spite of our community's best efforts to alleviate this poverty. Let's talk about this complexity. There are many factors that contribute to widespread and persistent poverty. This complexity can seem so overwhelming. It makes it difficult to know what actions we should take. And often this complexity can lead us to take actions that address some of the symptoms of poverty, but fail to end it. Root cause analysis helps us to begin to understand these many factors and how these factors interrelate with each other. And as we begin to understand how these factors relate to each other, we're able to identify the driving forces at play. Driving forces are those factors that have the greatest influence to produce poverty and prevent it from going away. Once we discover the driving forces, we can then identify high leverage points for transformative change. Points of high leverage are places within a complex system, like the city or county of Milwaukee, where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in other parts of the system, more directly and more powerfully addressing the deep root causes. Let's talk about leverage points more. In systems thinking, a leverage point is a place in a system structure where a solution can be applied. It's a low leverage point if a small amount of force causes a small change in how the system operates. It's a high leverage point if a small amount of force causes a large change in how the system operates. And I think you know what I'm talking about. High leverage is another way of saying we're getting more bang for the buck. Efforts to analyze the root causes of community problems often leads to new knowledge and deeper understanding of the underlying systems, the social, economic, political, educational, healthcare, and criminal justice systems, often leading to fundamental solutions to community problems that come as a result of advocacy and public policy work. Sometimes in our efforts to identify root causes, we uncover laws, policies, and practices that hurt the individuals, families, and communities we serve. Changing such laws, policies, and practices are examples of high leverage actions that we might discover through root cause analysis. The third point we need to keep in mind, the importance of knowing the difference between root causes of poverty and the effects or symptoms of living in poverty. Let's use an example. The lack of sufficient resources to pay rent on time is not a root cause of poverty. It's a consequence or symptom of being poor. We know why people can't pay their rent on time. They don't have enough money. Why don't they ever have enough money is the question we need to ask. Of course, at the same time, we need to understand that lack of sufficient resources to pay rent on time is also a factor that reinforces and intensifies other conditions of poverty. Now, as you might expect, there are several ways to conduct root cause analysis. First, by listing the causes. We can start by brainstorming a list of the root causes of poverty. Second, by leveling. After an initial listing of root causes, we can ask the same question a second or third time to go even deeper. For example, what are the root causes of the root causes we first listed? And third, by linking. Once we've begun to identify a number of root causes, we can explore them further to come to an understanding of how these individual root causes relate to each other. By mapping these relationships, we can identify the driving forces of poverty, and this knowledge of driving forces leads us to pinpoint places where we can take high leverage actions, actions that will have the greatest impact. Some good news. There are a number of accessible, user-friendly tools to help us begin to uncover, analyze, and come to a deeper understanding of the root causes of poverty. I'd like to talk with you about three of them: the iceberg worksheet, the keep asking why worksheet, and the root cause analysis worksheet. The first tool is the iceberg worksheet. Even if the iceberg worksheet may be new to us, we're familiar with the concept. We've all heard someone say it's only the tip of the iceberg, suggesting that there's much more to something going on below the surface, below what we can see. In fact, we know that most of an iceberg is below the surface of the water. In the same way, most of the root causes of problems are below the surface, and root causes, like the lower part of an iceberg, are sometimes difficult to reach. The iceberg worksheet helps us go deeper. Let's start with the symptoms of poverty. What's above the water? The symptoms and consequences of poverty, what people living in poverty experience every day, and what we can observe. Below the surface of the water are some of the contributing factors of poverty. And deeper still are some of the underlying root causes, the factors that create the contributing factors. So the underlying root causes produce contributing factors which result in the everyday symptoms of poverty. Let's look at two examples. Poor health outcomes are associated with being poor. Poor health outcomes are the symptoms. Again, what's above the water, what people experience, and what we can see. Below the surface of the water are contributing factors to poor health, often referred to as the social determinants of health. Things like lack of access to quality health care, unemployment and job insecurity, food insecurity, substandard housing, violence, and more. But what cause the social determinants of poor health? Deeper still, we see some of the root causes of the social determinants of health: systemic racism and sexism, the low-wage economy, and the US health system itself. The experience of trauma is also associated with being poor. Living in poverty often means surviving daily in dangerous conditions and with financial instability that limits access to necessities such as a sense of safety, food, shelter, and water. Poverty acts as a traumatic experience in many people's lives. Once more, below the surface of the water are the contributing factors. Examples of contributing factors are experiences that can lead to trauma, like exposure to violence, severe illness, natural disasters, and chronic poverty, and lack of access to some of the necessities that we talked about earlier: food, shelter, and water. And deeper still, some of the root causes of trauma, structural violence embedded in the many underlying systems we've spoken of earlier. Systemic racism and sexism, the low-wage economy, and the US health system, and other factors. Another tool for beginning root cause analysis is the Keep Asking Why worksheet. We identify a negative condition or problem associated with poverty, and we repeatedly ask the question, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And again, why is this happening? And so on. In the process, we go deeper and deeper in our understanding of why this negative condition associated with poverty exists and why it won't go away in spite of our efforts. And here's another format for the Keep Asking Why worksheet approach. Here's an example from the Building Movement project of applying the Keep Asking Why worksheet. The problem, seeking to understand why the dropout rate among high school students is so high. We ask ourselves, why is this happening? We're often told youth making bad choices, schools can't keep students interested. And again, why is this happening? Disenfranchised communities and schools that are under-resourced. Why is this happening? Lack of equitable school funding in poor communities. Why is this happening? Poor people lack power. And here's another example, the heightened risk of eviction that poor people experience. Why is this happening? Lack of sufficient resources to pay rent on time. Why is this happening? Low-wage jobs that don't provide sufficient income. Why is this happening? Lack of living wage jobs. Why is this happening? We can go deeper still. A third tool is the root cause analysis worksheet developed by the Building Movement project. Starting over on the left in column 1, we would list the condition or symptom associated with poverty that we seek to address. In the middle column, column 2, we list some of the root causes of this condition or symptom. And then in the third column, we list factors that are the reasons column 2 root causes persist, the causes of the root causes. Here's an example for lack of sufficient resources to pay rent on time. Starting over on the left, we list the condition or symptom associated with poverty that we want to focus on. In the middle column, column 2, we list some of the root causes of this condition. Low-income households lack sufficient financial padding or rainy day funds to cover emergencies. Low-wage employment that doesn't produce sufficient income to cover basic expenses. And then in the third column, we list factors that are the reason column 2 root causes persist. Again, the causes of the root causes. In our example, Wisconsin's $7.25 minimum wage. The lack of living wage jobs, which disproportionately affect people of color. The lack of access to quality education, which again disproportionately affects people of color. In each case, in using any of these tools, the iceberg worksheet, the Keep Asking Why worksheet, and the root cause analysis worksheet, we have an opportunity to deepen our understanding about why a symptom or condition associated with poverty exists and why it won't go away. We use this learning to deepen our understanding of the root causes, how they relate to each other, and where the best leverage points for action are. These activities lead to deep conversations about poverty, root causes, systems change, and advocacy. And confidence in our ability to take action grows as a result. The use of these tools can also lead to collective action with other groups to have real and lasting impact on poverty. Let's summarize what we've been talking about in this program by looking at the graphic we introduced at the beginning. The graphic summarizes some of the things we've talked about as a four-stage process. Over on the left, the process begins by using systems thinking tools to analyze the root causes of poverty. Next, moving to the right, this discovery of root causes helps us to build a shared understanding of the deep root causes that create and maintain widespread and persistent poverty in our community. We then use this shared understanding of the deep root causes to formulate action strategies that address these deep root causes through system-informed advocacy, community organizing, and public policy work. And over time, these systems-informed actions help to create lasting transformational change that benefit the people and communities living in poverty. I'd like to suggest some next steps. First, try out the root cause analysis tools we've looked at. Here's an example to consider using a three-step process to apply the root cause analysis worksheet from the Building Movement project. Also, think about ways to incorporate root cause analysis in some of the other important work that nonprofits engage in. A couple of examples: building root cause analysis into your strategic planning process, using the results of root cause analysis work to begin a review of your mission statement, using root cause analysis as the basis for program review, evaluation, and redesign, and also for updating your theory of change and program logic models. Also, think about the barriers and obstacles that will make it hard for your organization to move more of your work to the root cause level. There's a resource manual that includes a bibliography listing organizations, websites, and tools that can support your efforts to move more of your work to the root cause level. If you'd like a copy, contact me at frankmartinelli@createthefuture.com. Also, for people that want to start the conversation about advocacy with their board of directors, we have an on-demand video that focuses on this critical topic. You can find a link to this video in the resource manual. In addition, you can view the video "When Good is Not Good Enough: Why We Need to Reposition the Nonprofit Sector as a Force for Systems Change." This video is a recording of the TED Talk I delivered at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. I'd like to close now by thanking you again for viewing this video, and we'd like to know what you thought about it. Give us your feedback and let us know if you have any questions. We'd like to close now with one of our opening thoughts. This really is the moment in Milwaukee to be talking about advocacy and deep systems change. There's now greater awareness of the need to finally get to the deep root causes of widespread and persistent poverty in our community. And systems-informed advocacy is one of the powerful ways to tackle these deep root causes. Let's get started.